Welcome to the Intuitive Ascending Mind podcast with your host, Aliyah Yasmin Khan. Throughout this series, you'll learn how cultivating a growth mindset can unlock your true potential and impact every aspect of your life. Join Aliyah and her guest each episode as they dive deep into strategies for personal development and lasting transformation. Now, here's Aliyah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Intuitive Ascending Mind podcast. Joining me on today's show is author and researcher Dr. Dawson Church. He has perfected certain scientific methods to help people elevate their sense of thinking, their sense of being. Welcome to the show.
It is such a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to sharing. I'm looking forward to having fun together.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Dawson, share with us what your journey to this point felt like. What drove you to where you're at right now?
When you talk to people who are coaches, when you talk to people who are mental health professionals, you often find that they have a story of their own personal suffering leading them to offering those services to others. And I'm very similar to the typical mental health professional in that way, in that I came from a fairly fractured home and family situation. I was really unhappy as a child, as a teenager, eventually got away from my family and joined a spiritual community at the age of 15 and looked for spirituality to find answers to life's big questions. Why am I here? What am I doing? What's the meaning of life? And I spent many years actually in that quest, and I learned energy healing, I learned meditation, I learned about the perennial philosophy that underlies all the world's religions and spiritual traditions. But what I found was lacking in that community was a real lived walk your talk of what they were advocating. I didn't find that their actions were congruent with their beliefs. I hadn't found the same thing in churches, didn't find that in alternative spirituality. So I turned to psychology and became really expert in several branches of psychology, especially Gestalt therapy. And then I began to meditate seriously. And I was in my 40s at the time, but I made a commitment to daily meditation. And that day I did that was like before and after. It was such a sharp contrast, and everything began to shift for the better after that commitment. I then began to study energy therapies. I helped assemble research teams to help do clinical trials into energy therapies, primarily EFT tapping on acupressure points. And the early results from those were absolutely mind-blowing. And in psychology, in Gestalt therapy, for example, we found people changed. We found people were able to effect transformation in their lives, but it took a long time. The process was slow and often very painful. In energy therapies, I saw one veteran, for example. He had served 4 tours of duty in Iraq. He has severe PTSD, flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance, all the usual symptoms. And he described, for example, what he called the worst day of his life, when he was working as a medic and he was given the duty of cleaning the uniform of a friend of his who'd been killed in combat. And so he had to clean this uniform to send back to this young man's family back in the US. And the uniform smelled really bad. And so he had all these triggers, visual, emotional, olfactory, from doing that. And he was a 10 out of 10 in terms of emotion, as he told me the story of the worst day of his life, cleaning the uniform. But we were using energy therapies while he was doing it. Within 30 minutes, he was down to a 0. When I interviewed him later, he was down to a 0 still 6 months later. So I had many experiences like that, as well as doing clinical trials. And those showed me that these therapies can rapidly shift PTSD symptoms. And just last week, for example, I was keynoting a conference by Zoom in Kiev, Ukraine. And here we are training Ukrainian therapists and psychologists to use these same therapies with people traumatized by the war there. So when I discovered these therapies and began to apply them myself, for example, a lot of my issues just disappeared very, very quickly. And then I did the clinical trials that helped us now get them into Kaiser, into Cleveland Clinic, into the VA, into many other primary care systems. So that's been sort of a trajectory of my focus. And I just love seeing the way we now have these effective treatments for depression, anxiety, PTSD that we didn't have 15, 20, 40 years ago. So that's sort of where I've been and where I'm heading.
That's amazing. Let me ask you this question. What, tell me a little bit, I'm going to go back to that moment of that meditation. Like, what shifted? Because I've had a similar experience, and I remember just coming out of it, and I was like, this is it. Like, I'll never be the same person again. And it was that type of, I refer to it like a Satori moment that I experienced back in 2018. And I want to know what your experience kind of felt like during that time, and what was revealed to you in that process.
I didn't have that kind of immediate result from meditation when I did it in midlife. Now, I did when I was a kid. In my middle years, one day I was in my bed, laying in my bed at the age of about 14, and I was suicidal. I just wanted to get out of this life. My predisposition every day, the words I used were sick dread. I had a sick dread about every day into looking into my future. And a lot of kids, teenagers pass through that kind of dark night of the soul. And suddenly I found myself floating in this, the mystics call it the void, but others call it the great silence, the great stillness. There are a lot of names for it. And I found myself floating in this place, and I was just like, I dissolved into the universe. And I was looking at the universe, and I could see all the stars. I could see every single atom in the universe. And it was an amazing experience. And I realized as I was one with consciousness itself at that moment, that that was a possibility, that that state was possible for human beings to experience. Now, when I finished that experience, when I went back into my daily life, I was pretty much as miserable as before. But I understood that there was a there. I understood there was a place we could go like that. And I then spent years looking for it and occasionally hitting it again. And the Sufis call this a glimpse of heaven. When you have this glimpse of heaven, people have these during near-death experiences. They have them during out-of-body experiences. What in psychology we call anomalous experiences, but they're not anomalous. In fact, research shows 2/3 of people have some kind of anomalous experience like that in their lives. So the majority of human beings do that. And in my books, I actually trace the brain circuitry that processes, that mediates that kind of experience. But then what happened when I was 45 years old and made that commitment to daily meditation? That commitment was crucial because I dropped my excuses and I just did it every single day. So the next morning, I didn't really feel like getting up. My kids had to be at school at 7:30. I had to get up at 5:30 to meditate. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to sleep till as late as I could.
Yeah.
But I did. I did it that day. I did it the next day. I kept on doing it. And repetition is really crucial. We now know, of course, that neurons that fire together wire together. And we know that if you keep on persisting with the practice, eventually it builds neurons. What we did not know about meditation 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 10,000 years ago, is what the most effective practices are. And in my book, Bliss Brain, I look at all of the MRI research using advanced scanners, MRIs, EEG is useful, also SPECT scans, other scans can show you really interesting things about the brain. And I looked at what's really, really effective. And it turns out that most of what I'd been taught about meditation was not very effective, but a few things are highly effective. And so I built an evidence-based technique called EcoMeditation, which I began to share with other people about 15 years ago, and now it's spread all over the world. Millions of people do it. And I'm just looking at a letter right now that somebody just arrived in the mail a couple of days ago from a woman who said, I'm in my 70s. My therapist told me to do eco-meditation. I was so skeptical. I've tried to meditate many times in my life. I've always failed. And I did it the first time and I was there.
Wow.
And that's because it's science-based and it's physiological. It doesn't require any mental or belief system to make it work. It's just doing certain things with certain muscles, certain breathing rhythm, and you're able to hit what the Sufis call that glimpse. And then when you have the glimpse, you know there's a there. And once you hit the target one time, you can go back to the target every single time in meditation. So that's what you want to do, is you want to do the repetition. I was doing it ineffectively initially. I learned evidence-based methods. We had to do it much more effectively. And that's when you start to move into the advanced levels of transcendence. And there we find all kinds of shifts happening in the way our bodies work. We find shifts in gene expression. I have a book called The Genie in Your Genes, which trace the epigenetics of this, how it shifts gene expression. You then start to reach advanced states of consciousness where the barrier between you as an individual and the universal consciousness of the universe, that floating great silence that I touched at the age of 14, suddenly you are there every time you meditate. And that is such a profound change, because you then approach every day's activity through the lens of, I live in a world of infinite abundance, infinite love, infinite compassion, and that shifts the whole way the outer world looks for you. So that's what it's like for me. Persistence was the key, science was the key, and then doing it regularly enabled me to move into those states.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So my own personal experience, when I felt the losing of gravity, and I'd left the body, and I realized that I was still conscious, even though I had left the body. Like, there was a level of consciousness that was still present, that was there, and I had access to my mind, and that was still present, and that was still there. And I said to myself, this is the experience of the soul. And the soul holds the knowledge of the acquired knowledge of the physical world, of the mind, that the mind has acquired through the physical world. And that's what, when I came back, and much like you said, like, it's always a dark moment that I think a burst of light kind of comes through. And when I came back, like, over the period of, like, a few months, all of a sudden information started flowing to me, and I realized that we can acquire intelligence from the physical world, but then there is a higher source of intelligence that is infinite in nature, that we can channel through, that has nothing to do with the type of intelligence that we would acquire from the physical world. And that was mind-blowing for me. So I love that I'm having this conversation with you, because I know that I've actually experienced this, and I don't speak much about it because it's not something that's easy to explain to everybody, because experience is personal to us. Not unless we've gone through it do we fully grasp the magnitude of what that moment meant for you, and how it spoke to you in that moment, and how it guided the rest of your life as a result of it,
Yeah, and many of your characteristics of your experience are described in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, are described in the Bhagavad Gita, are described in the Vedas, ancient scriptures. They're also echoed by medieval mystics like John of the Cross and Brother Roger. So there are these milestones on the mystical path, and you actually hit many of them there. One of them is that downloading of intuitive knowledge. And I just love that, because you're no longer like struggling along with what you know on the outside world. And you're sure not looking at the outside world, or certainly not looking at the news for all the answers. You know that there's this inherent structure and wisdom in the universe. You know you can trust it. You know that you are an expression of it in the outside world. And then our big spiritual growth challenge is to release the obstacles that prevent us being that fully. In the words of the Bhagavad Gita, thou art that, thou art that. Rumi said it beautifully. He said, we are not a drop of the ocean of consciousness. We are the ocean of consciousness in a drop. And so when you realize you are that, I am that, then suddenly the purpose of your mind becomes to channel that. And when you become a channel for that, you discover that the universe longs to work through you, longs to love through you, longs to have compassion through you, longs to download knowledge through you. And I write these science books, and I read them afterwards sometimes. And I mean, they're rigorous science, they're hard science. They're physics, they're chemistry, the biology, and yet often when I'm writing them, I'm in trance and there's this sort of download going on. But then I go and check it against studies and research and other textbooks, and I make sure it's all verifiable. And it turns out that what science is describing is very much the same as the mystical experience, and we can quantify it now scientifically. So your experience is beautiful, and it's available to all of us. In fact, the perennial philosophy that underlies all the religions, which has been traced now for centuries, the perennial ideas below all the religions have all of those elements to them. And our purpose in life actually is to live from that elevated, inspired place, live it out. Our unhappiness comes from blocking it. And so our big job as human beings is to find those blocks and release them, surrender, and let that infinite love and intelligence and wisdom just flow through
Oh,
us
it's
every
it's
day.
so beautiful. It's so beautiful. I know at that moment I thought I was going to die. I just want you to know, like going back to 2018, I thought I was going to die. And I remember calling my mom. I was calling people. I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but all of a sudden, like all I could detect about this observable world, the first thing that stood out to me was duality. And I mean like duality in a major way. Everything just looked so dualistic in nature. Someone would just come and have a conversation with me, and my brain instantly went to duality. Like, that's not the way you should look at it. This is the way you should look at it. And I like an automatic type of like readjustment just was going on in there. And I said, this is kind of like, it's weird, it's strange, it's different. And I, much like you, I actually had to start studying this stuff. And as I started to study, I realized the knowledge is out there. Whatever I'd accessed permanently changed me in such a manner that like I know I wasn't the same person ever. Like I wasn't going to be the same person ever again. And today service is all that I have. And when I see someone in front of me, instead of being consumed with those egoic constructs or even the identity that we label that person with, I become conscious of that. I'm looking at a soul that's expressing itself into physical form. And that's what I'm here for, like to see the true essence in that manner.
And when we relate to other people that way, it changes everything. And so you see the homeless person on the street and you relate to them as God incarnate. You see the celebrity and you relate to them as God incarnate. You see your husband, your wife, your daughter, your grandchild, your parent. You see somebody who's impaired in some way, and all you see there is the divinity that is shining through them. And that means you can't be hard or harsh to people. You don't have to try and be compassionate.
Right, right.
You just are compassionate because you see that, and then you see people acting blindly or violently or harshly or ignorantly or unconsciously, and you know they're trapped. I was teaching a workshop for a local university this last weekend,
Yeah.
and it was at a nearby city, and I drove there and stayed in the hotel to teach the class. And the hotel had bicycles. So I checked out a bicycle, was riding around Berkeley, California, and I rode. There's an intersection with a car stopped there, and I had right away, so I rode through on my bicycle. And this driver was a woman looking at her cell phone, and she got so involved in her cell phone that she didn't notice there were several other cars behind her waiting to go. And then somebody honked at her, and she turned her head, she leaned out of the car window, and she gave them the finger and began to scream at the cars stacked up behind her and scream at me, the bicyclist, going through the intersection in front of her, and just hurl obscenities at us, just I mean at the top of her voice, top of her lungs. And the old me, I mean, 50 years ago, I would have been angry, I would have been hurt, I would have been felt attacked. All I felt for that woman was compassion, because I realized she had to be suffering so deeply when people are warmongers, when there are fearmongers, when they're anger mongers. They are simply projecting what's inside to the outside. And that woman was in hell. And all I could feel for her was utter compassion. So it changes even your view of people who are injuring you or acting injuriously toward other people. And as we, like as I did that workshop in Kiev for those Ukrainians, I didn't say anything bad about the Russians. It's like, they're suffering people as well. And I didn't tell the Ukrainians this, but when I get half a chance, I'm going to do another project with the Russians because they're going to have massive PTSD after this war is over. There's going to be huge amounts of trauma
That
compounding what's already
you
there in their
hit
society.
on like such a key point there, because is very ego driven when we see separation, and I strive to help people to understand this, because there is no separation. If I'm angry at you, I'm angry at me. If I'm hateful, I'm hateful at you, I'm hateful at me. Like everything, but I don't believe that they fully grasp the fact that they play so far down into the physical world that they can't grasp the fact of how it actually negatively impacts them. And I really, I'll tell you what I struggle with. I struggle with loved ones. I struggle with like family members that are struggling to understand this true essence of who we are. And because you always want your loved ones to do like the best, right? Like if I know a concept and I'm teaching it to people that are out there that are receptive, but then there's moments that I may teach it to a loved one and they don't receive it. And that bothers me. And I don't know how to resolve that within myself.
Me too. I have some of my family members, they're doing EFT tapping, acupressure release, they're doing meditation, and they're thriving. Others are doing none of the above, and they're suffering.
Yeah.
And I do my best to help without being intrusive, but you just have to sometimes watch people you love stuck,
Yeah.
and it's hard. And yet, until we're willing and ready, I mean, we have a coaching psychology course we teach as part of our certification program. And part of it is recognizing readiness and willingness. Are they ready? Are they willing? If they aren't ready and if they're not willing, then no matter how much you love them, you can't help them.
Mm. It is the one thing that I feel like, like how do I make this achievable? Like I've dumbed it down, it in simplest words as possible to kind of help move the mark, a little bit. But yeah, it's one of those things that's pretty interesting. Um, Share with me what your goals are now.
In my book, Mind to Matter, I focus on the scientific evidence that links thoughts to things. Um, One of my favorite aphorisms is that we are gods. And we are in a schoolroom in which, in slow motion, we learn the consequences of thought. And in Mind to Matter, I really don't go along with follow, teach, or believe in the kind of manifestation practices that many people have learned through a lot of the teachings nowadays of if you believe it, you'll see it, believe it, have intentions, set goals, and then by the power of the mind, you can make these things happen. And I've done that. I've manifested a Rolls Royce, and I manifested an estate in California, and I manifested all kinds of things, which turned out to be a disaster.
Mm.
So I was really good at manifesting things, and yet they often weren't my highest good. And what I teach in Mind to Matter is that manifestation is about tuning into the mind of the universe, the consciousness greater than yourself. And that's what the mystics do. We have a local reality, a local mind, a local consciousness. That's our everyday human awareness. We also live in non-local consciousness. We're bathing in consciousness. In that book, Mind to Matter, I present evidence showing that consciousness underlies the four forces of physics. And so it underlies gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and the weak nuclear force. All four forces of physics are affected by human consciousness. And what our learning process is to let go and unify with that consciousness. In the mystics call it non-duality, where you let go of your separation of your local awareness with non-local consciousness, and you become one. You merge non-locally with that consciousness. And that's the way our minds and our brains are meant to work. We then become a reflection of that universal consciousness, which then acts through us in all kinds of mysterious ways. We aren't trying to make things happen then. We're simply a reflection. We're stepping out of the way and letting that universal consciousness work through and manifest through us. So I don't set goals. I simply tune into the universe and meditation every morning and say, Thy will, not mine, be done.
Mm.
And then I breathe and say, what is your work for me today? And I get my own ego and my own wanting out of the way. It's very tempting to say, well, I want this and I want that and I want the next thing. And I require these conditions
Yeah.
in life. And all that does is set you up with disappointment or elation that you've either accomplished that thing or not got that thing. If you simply relax and say, Thy will rather than mine be done. As St. Francis said, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is conflict, let me sow peace. So we become that instrument, and that just changes everything. We relax, we let it flow through us, and we discover within a very few days that what the universe is manifesting through us is infinitely greater than anything we could possibly have birthed out of our own local limited human awareness. And so that's what I do. I just let things unfold. Sometimes the things that surprise me, sometimes the things I can't predict,
Yeah.
sometimes the things that I didn't think I wanted. And yet, as I just breathe and accept them, there are hidden blessings in them. So it's very advanced manifestational practice. But again, you see yourself as being the instrument of that non-local consciousness. And as it's flowing through you, it's immensely satisfying. The struggle goes away, trying to make stuff happen goes away, and love and beauty just expand.
Are you tired of feeling stuck? Unable to reach your personal goals? Imagine unlocking the powerful duality of your mind to propel yourself towards success. With our mental duality guide, you can finally achieve the personal development you've always desired. This guide is not just another self-help book. It's a transformative resource designed to help you harness the hidden powers of your mind, guiding you through the building blocks to create a structured approach to goal setting and achievement. What's in it for you? Clarify your goals. Learn how to define what you truly want in life. Overcome mental blocks. Identify and dismantle the barriers holding you back. Boost your confidence. Develop a stronger belief in your ability to succeed. Achieve consistent progress. Implement strategies that keep you moving forward even when challenges arise. But how do I know this is real? Countless individuals have transformed their lives using our techniques. One user, after applying the principles from the guide, reported a 91% increase in productivity and a newfound clarity in their life direction. Here's the story. Like many, they struggled with conflicting thoughts and feelings about their goals. After engaging with our guide, they learned to balance their rational thinking with emotional insight, leading to breakthroughs they never thought possible. And what are the guarantees? We stand by our guide with a 100% satisfaction guarantee. If you don't see progress within 30 days, we'll refund your purchase. No questions asked. Why now? The longer you wait, the longer your dreams remain out of reach. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Take action today and start your journey toward personal growth and achievement. What do you have to lose? Nothing but your limitations. Join the ranks of those who have discovered their potential through our mental duality guide. Act now and unlock the door to your future.
In your life.
I completely agree. It's interesting that you use the word manifest because a few days ago I was playing around with the concept of words because I think a lot of things are hidden in words and the words that we use. And I was looking at manifest, manifesto, which is a negative kind of connotation. Manipulate, you got that Manny in front of it as well, and it's somewhat kind of negative. And for me, I've never sought to manifest. Well, I have sought to manifest in the past. The old me did, and much like you said, about manifesting, yes, you get that temporary high, but it's very ego driven. What I strive to work towards is alignment, and that's the word that I actually use to describe it, is how do I get into alignment with the purpose that I'm here for? Like I came with assignments, like from my perspective, I came with assignments, and it's through surrender do I get the assignment to fulfill that task or that obligation or whatever it is that I'm supposed to do, and make that message available for others to understand that as well. So that's interesting that you said that, because I was very much struggling with the word manifest. A lot of people, they come to me and they usually are like, oh, I want to have X amount of dollars. And I'm like, yeah, but are you in alignment with that on a long-term basis? Like, are you in alignment? What are you actually in alignment with? If not, you're still going to be frustrated at the end of it. The money will come and the money will go, but what you're in alignment with would fulfill you for the rest of your life. Like you will feel that peace within you, like you're working towards something greater.
And when we study the brains of monks and nuns who are in these elevated states of oneness, they are in transcendence, they have left behind the individual human ego, and they're one with the all that is, we find they are extraordinarily happy. And there's a part of the brain called the insula that handles all the pro-social emotions and the positive emotions like gratitude, awe, joy, compassion, altruism, optimism. All of these involve, to some degree or another, the brain's lobe called the insula. And when people are in those states, the insula is all lit up. And also we see a lot of a particular wave called gamma. And the average person will have a 3 to 5 second burst of gamma when they get a dopamine hit, when they solve a problem, when they get something they desire. These monks and nuns will have 10, 15-minute bursts of gamma and have 10 times the amount of gamma that the average human brain produces. They are literally so happy, so in bliss, that there's no name for it. In fact, if you look at the Sanskrit language, there are various layers of happiness, and the ones that we think of as of happiness and joy are already at the lower level of the Sanskrit ladder. The Sanskrit language has words like ananda, absolute unqualified bliss, vishoka, sorrowless joy. And that's what these monks and nuns are. And so they're in extraordinarily happy states. Their brain waves tell us that, and they own nothing. They don't even own the clothes on their backs. Those are owned by the convent.
Yeah.
So they have no net worth.
Yeah.
They have no possessions, and they're in absolute ecstasy. And that's the big lesson, is that you don't need anything to be happy. I went through a period in 2017, and actually today is the anniversary of that. The particular day we're recording now is the anniversary of the day I lost everything. My wife woke me up in the middle of the night. It was 12:45 a.m., shook me awake and said, "Something's really wrong." And I looked out the window, went outside, and there was a wildfire sweeping down the opposite hill toward our beautiful estate. And I just yelled at her, "We're getting out of here right now." And we literally threw on clothes and grabbed our car keys and sprinted for the car as trees began to explode in flames around us. And we drove out through the flames, and we just barely escaped. And it was called the Tubbs Fire. About 5,000 homes were destroyed in one night. It just devastated the whole of the northern part of the North Bay in California. And so we suddenly found ourselves wiped out. We had no house, we had no possessions. Everything was gone overnight. And it took us, a while to even begin to come to terms with it. But we meditated. The next morning we meditated. The next day we meditated. And soon, after just a couple of days, we found ourselves feeling that we got ourselves back. We hadn't got any possessions back, but we got ourselves back. And it was so powerful to be resilient. So that was the first year. That was 2017. 2018, our business totally tanked because our office had been destroyed. With it, all of our records, all of our computers. And so we lost all our savings the next year, and we found ourselves hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So we just had one wipeout after another. And yet I wrote the book Bliss Brain during that year because I'd meditate and feel fantastic, even though objectively we were in a desperate situation. Subjectively, I felt as though I was loved, protected, nurtured by the universe, and I was one with something greater than myself. And so it taught me that, again, you don't need things to do this. You just need that connection with something greater than yourself, and it shifts your whole body. Eventually, it shifts your reality. You see opportunities, you rebuild, and you find that you can feel that's resilience when you feel that sense of well-being despite what's going on around you. And that's the potential we all have. That's the circuits in our brain that light up when we're able to connect with that greater reality. And then again, it just flows through to shape our outer reality, even when we lose everything.
That's such an interesting story, and I have to ask this question, and it's just from my own observation. Do you think, as you go through different levels of consciousness and you've reached a certain point in consciousness, that the tests can be harder?
What an interesting question. Can the tests be harder at different levels of consciousness? I think they're different at different levels of consciousness. I think initially there is the level at which you're being called to surrender attachment to obvious things. And that's one level of letting go. I know for me, when I was meditating at first and making that daily commitment, it was letting go of my attachment to sleeping late and just making that commitment to get up in the morning. So I'd let go of my desire for comfort. And so there are things like that, external attachments we have to let go. As you ascend in consciousness, there are other attachments and other things that happen. And one example is there are many enlightened teachers that we know the stories of from the last century who made it all the way to enlightenment. And then there were scandals in their communities. And, we know the stories in Buddhism, in Shambhala Buddhism right now, with early Buddhism teachers of alcoholism, addiction, sexual abuse in their communities, elder abuse, financial abuse. There have been scandals that have rocked the Mormon world, the Jewish world, the Hindu world. And why do we see these elevated teachers? And then there's all this stuff going on in their communities or with them. And so that's a different level of challenge when you are in these elevated states. And the reason that those scandals often occur is you stop caring about things going on down here. You stop caring about even your own body. And so a friend of mine who was a secretary to a really prominent guru in the 70s noticed that all the other gurus that he met, as well as his guru, they were mostly unhealthy. They were mostly neglecting their bodies. They weren't exercising. They weren't eating a balanced diet. They'd lost interest in that level of material reality. So those are different challenges from the ones you face when you're starting the journey. So is there a challenge-free life? I mean, eventually we all die, and then our bodies die, and we then our local consciousness ascends and unifies with non-local consciousness. And so you don't have all the challenges of money and health and relationships you have down here. But I'm so struck by the great scriptures, like there's one called the Crest Jewel of Illumination, written by a brilliant Hindu scholar in the 600s, a monk called Shankara. And it's regarded as one of the greatest scriptures of all the ages. And he begins the scriptures by saying, if you have a body and get an incarnation, you've won the lottery. You already are like one in a million, because he says there are a million souls out there who want a body for every soul that actually gets one. So the fact that you're simply here in existence is a real privilege. And so to treat it as a privilege, treat it as a privilege to be here, and then apply yourself to these lessons that many people just spend their whole lives just bumping around at the level of local reality. Swami Satchidananda said that most people approach death without preparation, just the way they've approached life. And so why approach it without preparation? Approach life by preparing. You are the soul. Your life purpose is to become one with that ocean of consciousness in your local consciousness, make the two one, and then live that. So why wait till tomorrow? Meditate today. Hit those states today, and then start to live your purpose. It transforms everything around you when you abandon your old life story and start to live from who you truly are. And the longer you delay it, the more of this precious life journey and incarnation you waste on things that don't really matter. So that's really what I recommend. We have our challenges. It is hard to be in a body. We are going to get sick. We'll eventually die. We have issues with money and relationships and all kinds of other things. And what if we saw those as blessings that we get to bring consciousness into those places? Say you're living with somebody and they're acting blindly or ignorantly or unconsciously. You hold them in love. You hold them in acceptance. You don't try and push them. You don't try and change them. That can be a powerful meditation. Your own body one day is going to decline. Even if you live to 100 years old, 100 centenarians, there are a lot of them nowadays, many more than there ever have been before in history, but they get frail and they have to deal with a frail body. How will you deal with that? And if you're dealing with other people with compassion and love, when you become frail at 95 or 85, whatever age it is, you have that same compassion to your own body. So bring this consciousness to your incarnation. The fact you have one is your lucky moment. And every day, every moment that you live unconsciously, obliviously, out of contact with that, is a moment you've lost and you'll never regain. So you may as well wake up in the morning, meditate, tune into the infinite, and then see how you can bring that awareness to every moment of every day.
Beautifully said. So beautifully said. I completely agree with everything that you've shared. Living in the moment and being appreciative for where we're at right now in this moment, and really seizing the opportunity to open up our awareness. I think it's just the more that we can become conscious of these methods of thinking, of meditation, or of understanding how we do have some level of control, but it comes through surrender. And it's almost like it's a duality thing again, like to control something, but you also have to surrender in order to have the control. And that direction or that flow is just beautiful. I think when you said rise above duality, that was something that resonated with me as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And we do have that option. And then we bring that awareness to everyday life. We bring that awareness to every moment. We find that after a while, it does get easier. And what we find in research is that I'm writing a new book called Spiritual Intelligence. It'll be published in about a year. And it's about the brain circuits that actually are responsible for connecting us with the infinite. And it turns out we have four circuits, four distinct circuits that neuroscientists have been mapping in the brain for the last 20 years. And they show that we literally have the hardware in every human brain to connect with the infinite. That hardware gets shut down by stress. And when we meditate and move out of stress, we activate that. But we then are able to move into that relationship with the infinite, mediated. And again, we have this hardware in our brains that literally is able to connect us with those elevated states of transcendence. Then we live that way every day. We activate those. They actually get larger, and some of them get larger fairly quickly. In some of the studies I talk about in this new book, Spiritual Intelligence, some of those parts of the brain are growing by 10% a month. And other parts of the brain start to shrink. We find in people in these elevated states, the amygdala, the brain's fire alarm, part of the stress circuit, starts to actually get smaller over time. The nucleus accumbens, very involved in addictions, starts to shrink over time. So our brains start to change and we become much, much, much happier than we otherwise might have been. So every human being has this hardware in their brains to connect them with the infinite. Most people just haven't turned it on. And again, our privilege is really to direct which parts of our brains are active, to detach our focus from all of the outside influences, the news, social media, distracting media, certainly negative and violent media, and then plug it in to what really inspires us, light up those brain regions. And it's just amazing to see your brain like that. And then to see the faces and the kind of emotional energy those people have. And then the other cool thing is you are way healthier. In one clinical trial I did, we found that people doing these practices intensively for 1 week at a retreat center, their level of cortisol dropped by almost 40%, and their level of immunity markers in their bloodstream rose by over 100%. So you're way, way, way healthier. You then have a much longer life. In a new set of studies I talk about in Spiritual Intelligence, the brains of Alzheimer's patients doing this style of meditation, where you're in your body, you're activating your positive physiology, those Alzheimer's patients, their brains reversed cognitive decline and began to grow again.
Wow.
So it produces better health that shows up over time as increased longevity. And people with all these positive emotions live on average 10 years longer than people who are stuck in negative emotions. So you have both a healthier life and a longer life and a lot more enjoyment along the way.
Absolutely. I want to touch on something because, so basically, what you're describing to me is mind over health in essence, which is like epigenetics. How does this impact? How does this impact? How do we get people to master the ability to calm the mind, to purify the mind? Because I really think it results also from a purified mind. I think a purified mind results in a healthy physical body. And by purification, I mean lack of judgment, forgiveness, things of that nature, resentment, stress, frustration, anxiety. I think if we're able to de-escalate that in the mind, then the physical being ends up being healthier and less susceptible to sickness. Now, it's not to say that sickness won't happen, but it is one of those things that are, like, I think the thermostat on sickness could be reduced dramatically through that practice. What would you, can you explain the power behind the epigenetics, how it works, and how people could possibly utilize this into their life?
Yeah, so it is hard to fill your mind with positive thoughts and focus on the good. And our brains were evolved by years, millions of years of evolution to focus on the bad. And it's called the brain's negativity bias and the mind's negativity bias. And one of the cool examples that I've heard other teachers use is if you look at a cup or a vase or anything and there's a crack in it, all you see is the crack. Our minds are just naturally designed to focus on threats and opportunities. So we look at what's wrong in ourselves, our bodies, our environment. And I have a bird feeder outside my window over here, and there are birds there, and they like, when I eat, sit down, I pray, I bless the food, I take each bite mindfully, and I have this wonderful spiritual experience doing that. The birds don't have that at all. They're landing on the bird feeder. They go peck, peck, peck. They look around, up, down, side, side to side. They peck some more. They look around. Nothing, the opposite of mindful eating. And the reason they do that is because evolution has honed us to stay alert. And they need to be alert because there's a cat that wanders around and occasionally jumps up on the bird feeder and tries to catch a bird. And there's a hawk above the bird feeder, sometimes circling it, will swoop down and grab a bird. So those birds cannot eat mindfully. Their brains are doing their evolutionary thing. The human brain does that automatically. So you sit down and meditate, try and meditate, and your mind fills with negative thoughts. And it does take practice and repetition. So in my science-based method called EcoMeditation, we don't even try and think positively. We don't try and still the mind. We don't try and fill it with positive thoughts. We just focus on the breath. And again, this is a very ancient practice. It goes back 10,000 years in the Vedas, goes back 3,000 years in the Yoga Sutras. Simply focus on the breath and you slow your breathing down. And when you slow your breathing down, your body automatically goes into parasympathetic vagal nerve stimulation mode, and you get relaxed, even though you're alert. So your breath alone, just slow breathing alone, do nothing else. Don't try and fix your mind. It's evolutionarily predisposed to look for threats. Just focus on the breath. And you focus on the breath and you stay with the breath. Then in EcoMeditation, we have you do tapping, and that tapping on acupressure points, that stimulation of these 13 points puts you into this really relaxed state. It changes the body's stress level within a few seconds. You then do some self-hypnosis, you relax certain muscles, and now physiologically, you're in the same physiological state as a master meditator without ever having tried to still the mind. The mind naturally then gets drawn into an increased level of stillness. Does it still wander? Yes, it does. But again, you keep bringing it back to the breath. And that's just the cycle of meditation. Research shows that even highly experienced meditators, their minds still wander. They've been meditating for 20,000 hours, and they still have to deal with the wandering mind and bring it back to the breath over and over and over again. It wanders less, gets more calm. After a while, you can move into that great stillness, that great void of the cosmos, and yet there's still that mind like the birds on the bird feeder. You just don't really pay much attention to it after a while because you're enveloped in the sense of bliss.
Yeah, that's beautiful, beautiful. Great words of wisdom. Any final thoughts? I just appreciate everything that you've given to us today. Any final thoughts for the listeners?
I would really encourage you to make meditation part of your life. You can download EcoMeditation for free. It's all over the web. It's on a bunch of apps. It's on a bunch of sites. And make it a practice for 30 days. And the reason that 30 days is so crucial is one of our clinical trials with MRI show that after 30 days, you have structural changes in your brain. Not changes in your mind, but anatomical changes happen in your brain in only a month of doing it. So the part of the brain that suffers gets quiet. The part of the brain that's filled with compassion and love gets very active. So just do that for 30 days. So make that commitment to yourself to spend 15 to 20 minutes, use EcoMeditation for just that first 30 days. What's likely to happen is you'll retrain yourself to feeling good in that 30 days, and you'll keep on doing it. One woman at one of my workshops, I said, I took your 30-day challenge, Dawson. I did it for 30 days. And I said, it's so wonderful you did it for that 30 days. And you know, what day are you on right now? And she said, I'm on day 147. She never missed a day. Another woman told me very recently, I'm now at day 1,000 of EcoMeditation. 3 years, never missing a day. Because you get so used to feeling good. You've retrained your brain. You've restructured the hardware of your brain to feel really good. So do that just for 30 days. And that's the first thing. Learn EFT tapping. EFT tapping is great. It takes 1 minute to tap and release stress. That's a great imminent stress reduction technique. But meditate. Fill your life with love. I have lots of grandkids, and I see them when they're bored, when they're teenagers, and they just are born into love. They know love. You don't have to teach a kid how to love. Kids just naturally play, laugh, love.
Yes.
Be that child living your life with that same sense of joy, and don't compromise, and definitely don't believe all the stories in your head that tell you can't be that and you don't deserve that. They are not true.
I completely agree. Thank you so much for being on the show. You've shared some amazing insights, and I'm so grateful. Thank you.
What a joy.
What a joy.